Yesterday, Sayadaw talked about vata dukkha, the suffering of the rounds. He explained this and expanded it to some extent. So cause and effect continuously happening is suffering. And there may be some good in it. There may be some good things that we experience. But the type of good things that we experience in life don't have any guarantee. They're unreliable pleasures, and they can be deadly, fatal. So most people like these types of things. Most people like the sensual pleasures that one can get in this world. So Sayadaw explained that there are 3 rounds. The round of kilesas, the round of deeds or kama, and the round of results or vipaka. These 3 rounds revolve continuously due to the interaction of cause and effect. And samsara is life that happens again and again and again. Samsara is our mind and body occurring again and again without a break. And as it flows, sometimes the flow is gentle, and sometimes the flow is normal, and sometimes the flow is very coarse and rough. But samsara is something that tends to dig a trench as it goes, so it gets wider and wider and stronger and stronger. So every object that we experience, seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, sitting, standing, bending, stretching, blinking our eyes, closing and opening our eyes, this is nama and rupa occurring again and again. And this nama rupa occurring again and again is samsara. And this samsara is suffering. So even when we're asleep, there's a very subtle type of mentality that arises. So where does samsara occur? It occurs in our being, our continuum of mentality and physicality. In Pali that is called santana. So samsara occurs as in every moment of seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, sitting, standing, walking, and so on. The stream of nama rupa continuously occurring is samsara. And within this, the rounds are revolving if we don't observe with mindfulness. When we don't observe the arising object with mindfulness, there's ignorance of suffering, dukkha aññāna. So this ignorance is not only not knowing, but in addition to not knowing, the suffering that is involved in every single seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, in addition to not knowing the suffering, we think that these experiences are pleasurable, sukha. We think that it's good to see, to hear, to taste, to touch, and smell, and so on. So, although it is suffering, we think that it's pleasant. So not seeing suffering, not knowing suffering at all, is apatipati avijja. And seeing it as pleasant, seeing what is really suffering as being pleasant, is mecha patipati avijja. And Sayadaw compared this to a cataract. Some people who have cataract don't see at all. That's like the first time not knowing at all. And some people see a little, but they don't see accurately when they have a cataract. And that's like seeing things in the wrong way. So this ignorance is very bad. Due to not seeing correctly, we go the wrong way. So we crave for the things we experience. So craving arises in two or three ways. For one thing, if we meet with a bad experience, if we have a bad experience some unpleasant feeling, that due to not seeing correctly, we crave for good feeling to come when we have something bad. And if we experience something good, a good feeling, then we want it and we long for it and we try to get more and more. And when we have a neutral feeling, we don't know. We can be deluded. So whatever feeling occurs, whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, there's always feeling of one of these three types in every moment of experience, every mental, physical experience. So if we don't know it as it really is, then when there's a bad feeling, we'll hope for something good. If there's a good feeling, we'll crave it. And if there's a neutral feeling, then we'll become confused, deluded. So, therefore, because of our not knowing, tanha arises due to not observing with the practice of satipatthana. So, from weak tanha, weak craving, it turns into strong craving. The type of craving that is unsatisfied unless it gets what it wants. Only if I get what I want. I won't stop until I get it. So that's strong craving. So we then try to get the things that we desire. And involved in this also is the view of self. We don't see that there's no self. So when we are pushed by craving and blinded by ignorance, then we do misdeeds in order to get what we want. And along the way, of course, there may be some good deeds, but these are in the minority, and whether they're good or bad, they lead to results because they are based on kilesas. So due to our deeds that are performed out of ignorance and craving, results arise. And for a normal person, the entire day goes like this, except for the time when one's asleep. One is just involved in avijja, ignorance, and tanha, craving. And our physical and mental being is just like a torrent of samsara. It's hurtling along with force. So most of the time we are spending our time with suffering. During sleep we get some relief, but the rest of the time our existence, although we may have some good things, good aspects to it, it's suffering, and it's like a heavy load that we have to bear all the time. Without the practice of satipatthana, then every day a person who does not have this practice is spending their time in the rounds of kilesas for the most part. Avijja, tanha, upadana, samvya, kilesas. Ignorance, craving, clinging. The three-part round of kilesas. So, avijja. Avijja is ignorance and not knowing. What does it not know? It doesn't know the Four Noble Truths. And it knows them incorrectly. So, for example, it doesn't know the truth of suffering. It doesn't know that avijja does not know that seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, and so on, the things we experience, are actually suffering. And in fact, thinks that these things are pleasant. So they think everything, seeing, it's good to see, it's good to hear, it's good to taste. And as far as the cause of suffering craving and clinging. They don't know, people think that this craving is good. They think that longing for things is good, and they don't know that it causes suffering. So regarding the truth of suffering, there's these two forms of ignorance. During a normal day, this ignorance is happening again and again and again. This practice leads to avedita sukha. This is happiness that is it's unmixed with any other. It's purely good happiness. And ignorance does not know about this type of happiness, and in fact it thinks it's like a way of dying. So it's okay. They think that the happiness of liberation is actually an eternal death without end. And due to ignorance, one thinks that this type of experience would be, there's nothing good about it, because there's nothing to see, there's nothing to hear, there's nothing to taste, touch, smell. So how could it possibly be good? There's nothing to experience. So that is ignorance about the third noble truth. And then the practice of satipatthana is to gain this type of happiness, pure happiness. But most don't know about this practice, or if they do, they think that it leads to death. They think that it leads to just being extinguished. So for each of the Four Noble Truths, there's two forms of avijja or ignorance, and therefore there's 8 types of avijja. When we don't know, we crave. So first there's ignorance, and then there's craving. When we think that bad things are good, we think that seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, and so on is good. And from there, from weak craving, it goes to strong craving. And together with strong craving, there's the belief in self, there's the sense of self. That I am doing this, I am experiencing this, and wanting for oneself. So when one has these, one won't be able to control one's physical, verbal, and mental behaviors. And for the most part, our behaviors will be akusala, unwholesome. And after the akusala is over, after committing a physical, verbal, or mental akusala, it's not over yet. There's still a seed of kilesa for further kilesas to arise, left behind. Sometimes we have good mentality, good acts, good speech, and then we get some good results. But these still lead to further existence. So the good deeds that we do relieve us to some extent in samsara. But as long as the round of kilesas revolves, then the round of deeds will continue. And as long as the round of deeds continues, the round of results will continue. If the round of results continues, we'll get a new life. And that life will have at the base avijja, ignorance, and craving, tanha. So these are at the root of new lifetimes. And every experience we have in that new lifetime will further feed the ignorance and craving. And this is why the Buddha said that in our continued existence of mind and body, it's true suffering. So for those who are not acquainted not familiar with the Dhamma of the Satipatthana practice, the 3 rounds will continue endlessly. Now that's for sure. So if we don't destroy the round of kilesas, then the round of actions, the round of deeds will not be destroyed. And if the round of deeds is not destroyed, the round of results will not be destroyed. And therefore, there will be further kilesas, further deeds, further results. And Sayadaw said, kilesas undestroyed, action continues, thus results arise. But destroy the round of kilesas, then action stops, as do results. In order to stop the rounds, one has to just stop. Start again. So when light arises, one doesn't have to do anything special in order to dispel darkness. It happens naturally when light arises. And in the same way, if we can destroy the critical part of the 3 rounds, then we'll be able to put the whole thing to a halt. So the critical part of the 3 rounds is the round of kilesas. If we get rid of the round of kilesas, then the other 2 will automatically stop without us having to do anything special to make them stop. Yesterday, Sayadaw gave the example of a person. On a human being, there are many parts. There are small, medium, large, legs, and so on. And if we cut one of these off, even if we cut off many of these, the person won't die. But if we cut off the head, then we don't need to continue to cut off limbs in order to kill the person. Cutting off the head will do it. So, of the kilesas, avijja is the worst, and avijja is the head, because due to avijja, we have new life. So with not know, avijja is that which does not know the 4 Noble Truths. It doesn't know that the truth of suffering is to be known. The truth of its cause is to be dispelled. The truth of cessation is to be realized, and the truth of the path is to be developed. If we practice Satipatthana, we will know the truth of suffering. By knowing, its cause is dispelled. We will arrive at cessation, and we will develop the Noble Eightfold Path. So, when kilesas are destroyed, there will be no more deeds and no results. And if we destroy avijja, ignorance, then the round of kilesas will be destroyed. Avijja, with avijja, we don't know dukkha as dukkha, we think it's sukha. We don't know suffering as suffering, and we think it's happiness instead. But when we have the practice and note the arising object, we come to know. So in the moment of seeing, Sayadaw mentioned that eye and form, 2 parts are physical. Seeing, contact, feeling, these are mind. So we can see, when we observe seeing, in the moment of seeing, there's the eye and the visible object, and these 2 are physical. They come into contact, and there's knowing, seeing consciousness, contact and feeling. And this is mental, mainly seeing consciousness. And that's all there is in this moment of seeing. There's just mental suffering and physical suffering. Mental dukkha and physical dukkha combined in the moment of seeing. And if one doesn't know, one won't know that. One won't know the suffering in the moment of seeing. And one will think wrongly about it. One will know it wrongly. But if, with the practice, we know seeing, as we gain practice, when we do it again and again and again, we will see these elements of the I that receives the form, and the visible object that contacts the I base. And then the mentality that arises, the seeing consciousness, the contact, and the feeling. So Sayadaw continued, in this moment, dukkha is to be known. Seeing, that's how we should note. So this, in this moment of seeing, when we observe, so that we see the elements, then we know them clearly, and based on dukkha, knowledge arises. So we have knowledge of dukkha. So in this way, no ignorance there's no ignorance anymore about the seeing moment. If there's no ignorance, then there won't be any craving, and there won't be any clinging. And further, akusalas won't happen. There's no kilesas for kusalas to be based on. So no actions result. And although we're practice, this bhavana is kusala, it's not a type of kusala that will lead to further existences. It's a type of kusala, bhavana kusala, leads to the end of existences. If we don't know to catch seeing as soon as it arises, it won't stop with just seeing. Based on what was seen, we'll think, oh, it's beautiful. If it's something beautiful, we'll keep on looking. We'll examine the parts, every little part of the thing that was beautiful. So at this moment of seeing, the dukkha that is really there, we don't know it, and further, craving arises due to our ignorance. So one must note to catch the objects as soon as they arise. One has to make that type of effort, because otherwise akusalas will arise. So if we note as soon as the object arises, there's just the I, the form, consciousness, there's just contact and feeling. So it'll just stop with those, with that experience. Sometimes when one's noting is effective, then when one notes seeing, sometimes what one observes is the physical aspect. One knows the eye, one notices the eye, or one notices the form. Sometimes the mental aspect is apparent, the seeing consciousness, or the contact, the meeting between the mind and the object, or the feeling of good or bad, neutral. So in that moment of noting, knowledge is there. We know clearly what is there. Because there's knowing, there's no more ignorance. Without ignorance, we don't crave for anything. And in that moment, the round of kilesas is broken. And no action, no deed or result will arise. So in our being, the physicality and mentality are continually arising. These are results of our actions are continually arising. And without the satipatthana practice, we don't know them accurately. We don't know the suffering, and or else we know it wrongly. And therefore we crave what we experience, these results that are continuously arising. But when we note with this practice of satipatthana, then first of all we come to know, to discern physicality and mentality, rupa and nama. And then we come to see how they're related by cause and effect. And thus seeing, we discard the view of self. And as we note, we see the true characteristics of phenomenon. And when we see like this, it's really pleasant. But this is what we're aiming for in the practice, to see the natural characteristics of phenomenon. If we don't develop the path, then the 3 rounds of kilesas, deeds, and results will continue to revolve. Also, if we don't walk the path in a straightforward way, the rounds will resolve. So not practicing the Eightfold Path, the rounds continue to revolve. Developing the Eightfold Path, the rounds come to a halt. So when we develop the Eightfold Path in a moment of noting, then in the Eightfold Noble Path, there's the wisdom group containing the factor of wisdom. When wisdom is there, there's no ignorance. In that moment, ignorance is decapitated. So Sayadaw Ji will mention tomorrow, he will continue to talk about how the rounds continue and how they're cut off. And he said that this is a deep topic, so he needs to speak about it repeatedly. That's all for tonight. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.